Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the Tuesday 4 o'clock news and politics show. As we usually do, kick off with Inside the Beltway Politics with Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Jennifer, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Well, want to kick off sort of the big news today in Washington was these questions leaked to the press, maybe if you will, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the president. Now, if these were the questions that he was floating to Trump's lawyers pertaining to Russia, what's the talk been down there that these questions are out there?
Well, two things. First, they indicate that Mueller is going to do everything he possibly can to make it very difficult for Donald Trump to refuse to answer these questions. By providing the questions ahead of time, he's already demonstrated that he's willing to concede quite a bit in terms of respecting the president and the office of the president. And so by floating them, he's made it more difficult for the president to say no. The other thing I would note is that these were not linked from Mueller's team,
okay,
right? So this was the White House trying to put these questions out. And it's a little bit unclear why they would do so. One reason would be to say, look, we're going to make it very clear that the investigation is not explicitly about collusion. None of the questions themselves use that word. That's a possibility. Another possibility is for the White House to put them out to make it very clear to all of Trump's supporters that, of course, he has to say no and that he's not willing to answer these questions because they're far too open-ended and he'll tie a rope around his neck.
And we've seen some reaction, though, today from Trump. Like, we got some mixed signals. It didn't sound like he believed maybe it was from his side.
Well, this wouldn't be the first time that the president is not necessarily on the same team as his own staff. It's also unclear that he understands why they would have an incentive to leak it. Now, if it's true that they're trying to shame him into refusing to speak to Mueller because the questions are bad, this might have been their attempt to send a signal to the president without him actually signing off on that leak.
And did you read through the questions? Were there any ones that maybe raised an eyebrow? You talk about the fact that there was nothing referencing collusion. Is that the biggest takeaway?
I mean, I think the big takeaway is that it is a very widespread set of questions, right? So we're not only talking about one particular meeting. They're talking about firing Mike Flynn. They're talking about the meeting at Trump Tower. They're talking about the Don Jr. letter. There are a wide variety of questions, Comey's firing. So all of the little incidents along the way that have raised red flags are part of that list, which suggests that the scope of the investigation is wide. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is that all of them require quite a bit of elaboration. So these are the top line questions, right? And there would be a lot of sub-questions. These are not quick yes-no questions. So it also highlights that the administration, if they're planning on only saying that they'll lend Trump to the special counsel for an hour or 2 hours, it's probably not going to get what they want because we're talking about at least an 8 or a 12-hour period required to shed light on the answers to these questions.
So we've known for some time now that Mueller was eyeing, again, having Trump in for this line of questioning. Again, these questions coming out today just spurred conversation certainly down there. Do we have a sense of time frame, Jennifer, now that, again, these questions are out, that this sit-down could potentially happen? Whose hands does this, who makes this a call at this juncture?
Well, I mean, the important thing to remember here is that the only thing that we know is that the New York Times had these questions, right? Somebody sent them to the New York Times. We don't know what Mueller's timeline is. We don't know exactly how the Trump administration will respond. If previous leaks from the investigation are any indicator, then probably soon, because once something is made public, it seems usually to be the case that Mueller and his team have already begun to take the steps to do whatever it is that leak talked about. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about the next couple of weeks or months. The earlier that Donald Trump speaks to the special counsel's office, the better, if he's worried about how his statements could play at the midterm election point. So sooner is better than later if he's concerned that this could ultimately be a drag on Republicans running across the country.
So we're keeping an eye on the time frame of this line of questioning that, again, was released today from special counsel Robert Mueller. Let's talk a little bit about time frame and where things are with the correspondents' dinner and the reaction to it. Are we at the tail end of the news curve here?
I think we are. I mean, I never thought I would say this, but I think Chris Christie said it best. That's a sentence I didn't expect to come out of my mouth, but I think he said it best when he said that anybody that is surprised or upset about this really should just keep in mind that the same way that the Trump administration hasn't done a great job vetting, neither did the White House correspondents, because Michelle Wolf gave them exactly what you should have expected given the comedy that she performs. And so anybody that's upset or thinks it was too raunchy or too dirty or too below the belt has clearly never seen her perform before. It was completely unexpected to see this kind of criticism, given that what she put forward was completely expected.
And, because we saw some backlash. We saw it from, the press, not a huge surprise. I mean, they knew who it was going to be. Clearly, the correspondence organization as itself makes that call. But again, were you surprised at this type of reaction that the press was so harsh on it?
I mean, I think that the press was stuck a little bit between a rock and a hard place because the administration at least gave them a little bit this time by sending Sarah Sanders or Kellyanne Conway to the dinner, right? So although Donald Trump bashes the press on a daily basis and questions the values of the First Amendment, by having high-ranking administration officials at the dinner, it seemed like it was at least a little bit of a concession or a little bit of a move toward détente. And then when you have Wolf do what she did, it can sort of backfire. So I'm not that surprised that they were a little bit upset. But again, this is a situation where it's crazy to think that they didn't know what they were getting.
And clearly when you have the speaker, when you have the comedian basically deliver at the correspondence dinner, I mean, what'd you think? Scale of 1 to 10. Was she funny or not?
I mean, I thought she was a little mean. I thought a lot of it was funny, but I think that the best stuff is funny and mean, and I think there was a big distinction. Like, her funny stuff was funny, and her mean stuff was kind of just mean. But I think the other reason that it's important to put this into perspective is typically after the comedian delivers remarks, the president gets up and is really the star of the evening and delivers biting remarks back. And that just didn't happen because Donald Trump refuses to participate. So, I think she might also be being held to a standard that's not entirely fair because typically there's somewhat of a rebuttal.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about chatter going on with what we've seen with North and South Korea. A little détente, as you just mentioned, if you will, chattering the President of the United States Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. I mean, look, if this turns out to be the wave of the future, and if North and South Korea actually are going to walk across the border and hold hands on a regular basis, then people have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize for a lot less. Now, what I would say though is that I'm not sure that the Nobel Peace Prize should be awarded to somebody whose sort of uncertain behavior and instability that he brings to the global community is what might have inspired North and South Korea to get together and try to end this war. So it might be the case that this is in large part a result of Donald Trump, but not necessarily his negotiation skills. It could be a result of the fact that he doesn't always know exactly what he's doing, and that level of uncertainty creates incentives for other players to start making nice. So time will tell, but I would not be surprised if he winds up getting the Nobel Peace Prize.
So a lot of chatter going on there down inside the Beltway, but certainly wanted to bring you back up here to Rhode Island, a state you know so well, with what's transpired in the last week. A lot of conversation since then. It seems like it's almost even been a year. Matt Brown saying that he's going to enter the gubernatorial race as a Democrat, looking to primary Gina Raimondo, who already has a couple other contenders in the field. And then Link Chafee saying that he's looking at taking on Sheldon Whitehouse. Let's start with the governor's race.
Look, I think it's the only way that Matt Brown's got a shot to win, right? And I said several weeks ago or a month ago, whenever he announced that he was running as an independent, that there's just no room for that on the ticket. A really, really divisive, crowded Democratic primary could be a way for him to eke out 24 or 25% of the vote in a crowded field and then face a Republican challenger and ultimately win. I still think the odds are not in his favor, but it makes much more strategic sense than running as an independent.
And what did you think when you saw, if you did see these fundraising numbers from the governor for Q1 2018, $1.3 million?
She's not kidding around, right? She wants to make sure that she scares off any challengers that would otherwise be thinking about running and have not yet filed. And I think she also wants to make it very clear that from day one, she has enough money to get on TV and make sure that she makes her case to the residents of Rhode Island, and that at the end of the day, she also has enough money left to bash whatever challenger manages to, sort of make it closer to Election Day. So, I mean, those are very, very healthy numbers.
So both on the gubernatorial side and the senatorial, we're looking at two candidates running to the left of the established candidate, ostensibly on the Bernie Sanders wave, and what we had seen here in Rhode Island in 2016 with Bernie besting Hillary Clinton. Can Matt Brown count on that, or is that not really the deciding factor?
I'm not sure that it's the deciding factor. And keep in mind, too, that Gina Raimondo and Sheldon Whitehouse are not Hillary Clinton. So part of the Bernie Sanders appeal had to do with who his opponent was in the primary, and then ultimately how that opponent might fare in the general election. And so a lot of the baggage that Hillary Clinton had, a lot of the establishmentness that she carried with her, I don't think are necessarily liabilities for Whitehouse or Raimondo. Now, it's possible that voter turnout will be a little bit higher, or people that voted for the first time because Bernie Sanders motivated them to register and vote will now be part of the electorate. But, I don't think that there's a direct transfer.
And Link Chafee looking to take on Whitehouse. Let's look at that race.
I mean, the funniest part about that is if Lincoln Chafee would have run as a Democrat in 2006 against Sheldon Whitehouse, he would still be in the Senate, right? So, I mean, I don't think that there's much to be said here. It's also pretty hard to make the case that Whitehouse isn't a solid progressive leader. Now, sure, you can highlight a vote here or a vote there, but when you look at the Rhode Island delegation, he's certainly as far to the left as you can get.
So it's going to be an interesting political year here in 2018 in Rhode Island, and certainly across the country. We really appreciate being able to pick your brain. Anything else to keep an eye on in the coming week?
I mean, I think that what we're going to see a little bit more of this week is more discussion of the steel tariffs as well. Right now, Canada, Mexico, and the EU are all disgusted with Donald Trump. So the day that South Korea and North Korea are like, oh, maybe he has something to offer us, every Western ally is turned off. So this is just one of these things where name the issue and you're going to get a different group of people that are either supportive or opposed. And that's not a great position to be in if you're trying to elect a lot of Republicans or keep their seats in November.
And then, we looked and saw North and South Korea, Iran. Any thoughts for the future, keeping an eye on that there with the revelations this week?
Well, I mean, if anything so I saw Netanyahu on the news this morning basically parroting the same lines as Donald Trump, like verbatim. And so, literally, like they put up the screens next to each other. And so,
do you think they had the same talking points? Do you think they exchanged emails?
I think they might have sent a text. I don't know. Twitter. It was all via Twitter. And so I think that I think that Donald Trump is going to continue, especially after the meetings that he had with France and Germany last week, to explain why the Iran deal is bad and prepare everybody for the U.S. to in no way be willing to negotiate.
Well, keeping an eye on things, foreign relations nationally and also here in Rhode Island, Jennifer Lawless, we always appreciate being able to pick your brain. We look forward to talking with you next week.
See you next week.
Okay, thanks. Jennifer Lawless down at American University, heading to UVA, former congressional candidate here in Rhode Island. Always like to get the Inside the Beltway take with her on Tuesdays. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get a little more local here at GoLocal. We'll be right back. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock News and Politics show. Just chatted with Jennifer Lawless down at American University. We're getting a lot more local here. Paul Dowdy, the head of the Providence Firefighter Union. Thanks for coming in today.
Hi Kate, my pleasure.
You've been a little active in social media in the last couple days. There's been some chatter pertaining to the elephant in the room, the $1 billion unfunded pension liability, and how certain city council members are approaching it. Let's talk a little bit about what you heard maybe in the last week in the press pertaining to who's been sitting down and talking about this and who hasn't.
So recently the City Council of Providence released a working group pension report, and it disappoints me that if you're going to have a working group, bring all the stakeholders in, because the report represented a collection of ideas, and I think that labor is critically important. We're going to be the ones that are half of the bargain, so not to give us the time or the opportunity to share our ideas or maybe to collaborate and come up with synergistic ideas was unfortunate.
And so you, again, had to have known, here we are, it's 2018, after the Tavares administration and the deals that were cut back then. Did you have a sense that this is the time frame that we were looking to be on as the city to sort of revisit and reopen the issue?
No, I think that the firefighters have both worked with Mayor Tavares and Mayor Lorza during the last couple of years of strife. So it was disappointing, again, that the working group comes out and expects us to readjust the pension agreement that was negotiated by Sam Zurier, who was the object of my Twitter storm. And he signed it knowing what the cost would be. So I feel like it's buyer beware. We were well aware of what the consequences were going to be, what the concessions were going to be, and what the cost was going to be. And I expect the same from both Councilman Zurier and the council more broadly, that they did their due diligence and that they actually read it before they signed it.
So where does this put us now? If you weren't part of the working group, and if they have suggestions about how to move forward, do they now say, oh, come to the table now?
Well, you can see my frustration. It becomes really problematic. Now that I've raised the issue that you didn't include us, if you invite us, I think there's a lost opportunity, and it's a way just to build a bigger and thicker wall. And the success between the firefighters and Mayor Tavares was due almost singularly in because of the point he gave us all of the documents that we asked for. It was cordial, it was always respectful, there were no ambushes, there were no working group papers that came out that I didn't know about.
Did you feel ambushed?
Ambushed in the sense that the start of an ambush. Obviously they didn't make any headway on this, and I think that's part of the problem. I don't think they're going to make any headway. If you're not bringing in the person on the other side of the table with you, you shouldn't expect to succeed. And to me it means that you're considering doing it by force, and that's my concern. If you want to do it by force, you're going to have a fight on your hands. We're not looking to give anything back, anything. But if there were areas regarding the pension where we found common ground, now you've lost the opportunity to maybe enjoy whatever changes we could have agreed to mutually.
And you've had conversations with the councilman since the Twitter exchange. Find any common ground?
Now, I spoke to Councilman Zurier at his invitation today, and I expressed the same concerns I'm sharing with you now. I thought it was a lost opportunity, but with that said, I'm still open. If there's good ideas, they're good ideas, whether he consulted with us or not. I didn't see any in that report, but that doesn't mean that none exist.
And you've raised a few issues on Twitter yourself pertaining to other areas to look at, perhaps, in city spending and city obligations. One that you took to task was health care for city council members.
Yeah, a little sarcasm involved there, but it just goes to show if I'm going to look at what their issues are, that to me is one that I know resonates with the public, as does pension reform. So I think when you're playing to the public, then you better be prepared to be played back against.
And what is the sense of the union, again, as the issues clearly now back in the forefront? It is an election year. People keep tossing out the big B word. We don't really see much movement towards it. He addressed it in his piece about surgical bankruptcy, but the reticence for him, because we all know what that could potentially look like. Is that in the union situation, is that just the worst case scenario?
I don't think it's a realistic scenario, and what I base that on is the city has a surplus, run a surplus last year, projected to run one again this year. And also, we haven't had any tax increases, and we're not advocating for tax increases, but it does go to the ability to raise money to prevent a bankruptcy. Obviously, when you're going to have a bankruptcy key, you know all the damage that's going to be done, as goes Providence, as goes the state. So all of those things, I do think the economy in Providence is improving, and I don't think talking about it from our political leaders is helpful, and I think that's why they're reluctant to even say it. And then I think from a legal, a very sharp legal point of view, we're not even close. So I think there's ways to avoid it. And again, that goes to why I think Councilman Zuria lost an opportunity to find somewhere where we can agree, or there could be trade-offs. But if that's how you're going to treat us, that we can't sit at the big table, then don't come to us later on with your ideas for us to adopt.
So what do we expect the next steps are? We saw what the working group sort of came out with. You've had a conversation with the councilman. Do we have any sense as to what's next?
There's a bill pending at the General Assembly related to the sale of the Water Supply Board, so we're watching that. We really don't have a stake in it. And other than that, there was some talk about putting together another working group, this time with the unions, but again, I said, it's much more difficult to be nice after you've taken a shot at me, and so he'll have a challenge if that's what his plan's going to be.
I mean, if the union was brought to the table for the next working group, I mean, you just articulated your position. I mean, what would the union bring to the table in that working group discussion?
Well, so one of the primary issues that we face is if the sort of the impetus to get us to agree to any changes are the trade-off that we won't ask you again. That's what you told us last time, and now not only are you asking that again in the context of this working group paper, but you didn't even tell us about it. You surprised us with it. So it makes us really reluctant to think that we've got a partner on the other side that's going to engage with us honestly, ethically, and with a sense that I really mean what I say, that we're not going to come back. So it makes us really reluctant to sit at the table, both because there's some futility there, and in particular, Councilman Zuria was at the last table and agreed that this was the end of it.
Were you, I mean, just surprised? I mean, did you think, dating back to the last one, that there could be any potential that they would try to reopen it?
No. Mike D'Amico is one of the smartest people I've ever dealt with, one of the most honest brokers I've ever dealt with on behalf of the city, and he laid it out. There is nobody that was at the table that did not have the access, the time, or the opportunity to look at what his projections were, to challenge him on his projections. And he laid out that it's 3.5% every year. Nobody should be surprised. And we understand that there's going to be an increase both in the size of the revenue that comes in as well. Whether those perfectly trail each other is a question that should have been asked at the time. And right now there's really no divergence. It hasn't been long enough that we can say, oh, this is not going to work. So unless Mike D'Amico tells me this isn't going to work, I'm not going to believe anybody.
So you got to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Correct. He put it together brilliantly, and for anyone else to say that it's not when they didn't say it at the time is suspect to me. And also, I put into context the time of year it is. This is an election year.
It's an election year.
And nobody likes paying for pensions. It's that simple.
So what have you heard from membership this week in the little sparring and back and forth? What are you hearing from the rank and file?
Actually, not too much. Morale's much improved since we went back to the 4 shifts. We just settled all our outstanding litigation with the city as well. So they don't necessarily get fired up on some of the nonsense that goes on. They'll leave that to me.
They've been certainly fired up in the past, but certainly fired up in reaction to what you heard from Councilman Zuria. So I appreciate your taking the time to come in and give folks a little bit of the lay of the land and what's taking place here in the city of Providence. Paul Dowdy, hopefully we'll have you in soon.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock news and politics show. We are politics. And Nick Audiello is officially kicking off the state Senate campaign for District 5 in Providence. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Kate.
So talk with us a little bit. You know, here we are, it's May. You've been off to the races for a little while, so let's talk about the time frame. Why now?
Well, it's, campaign season is getting started. Folks are starting to pay attention. And we're really going to start hitting the ground running. I've been knocking on doors for the last few weekends and getting great feedback from voters. And I'm excited to, start this next phase of the campaign into the summer.
Well, I'm glad to have you in here because we did back, I think it was Q4, you had raised some big fundraising numbers. Yes. So talk with us, talk with the viewers while we have you here in studio about why you're running for the seat.
Sure. So I grew up here in Rhode Island. And when I was growing up, my dad's small business fell victim to a changing economy, and it was a jewelry store, so it was a sign of what was to come. And this was about 2004, 2005, and we had to move to Florida to find new opportunity. And so I'm running so that no kid in Rhode Island has to have the same problems and the same lack of opportunity that I went through when I was a kid. And I want to make sure that that promise that we're told about in 3rd grade civics of the American dream is actually open to every single person in our state.
I mean, how much do you hear about that from Rhode Islanders? I certainly hear it in the press all the time about losing our youth. They go away to college and they don't come back. Was this just one of the top issues that you've heard? It's
absolutely the top issue that I've heard, especially from an older generation I've been plenty of places around the country, around the world. There is a Rhode Islander doing something amazing in every big city in the country. When I was in London, there's Rhode Islanders everywhere. They could be doing all of these things here. They could be building our state up, and instead they're contributing their talents and their skills to some other place. And meanwhile, we're suffering for it.
Okay, so you're going to have the big kickoff tonight at Caserta's Pizza, which is why I wanted you in here. Is that your tops? Is that your fave?
I don't want to judge, but I've been going there since I was 3 or 4 years old, and so there's a special place in my heart for it.
So what's going to be the message tonight when you talk with folks about why they should be voting for you?
It's going to be just that. It's going to be opportunity, and it's going to be a call for a new generation of leaders in Rhode Island. I came back here 3.5 years ago from grad school, and the same people who were in charge when I was born are still in the legislature today. And we wonder why things have gotten the way they've gotten. It's because we've had the same people who are just in it for themselves and titles and feeling good and not delivering for the people of Rhode Island. And I think we need a new energy, a new outlook into our future, and we can really make some big changes here. And I know that Rhode Island can be the best state in the whole country.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the big issues up at the State House as you're eyeing the seat here. They're kind of in that home stretch. It is an election year. They're not looking to stay there any longer than they have to, that's for sure. A couple of things we're looking at. We're waiting to see if there might be any legislation pertaining to the Pawtucket Red Sox. We saw the Senate approve it, sitting in the House. We do know that the Speaker has had conversations. What's your thoughts on the Pawtucket Red Sox look at the Apex site in Pawtucket?
The Paw Sox are a treasured Rhode Island institution, and it would be a shame if they left.
So keeping an eye on that. Again, it's the Senate side that has approved the current legislation as it stands. We're waiting to see if anything else comes out of the House. Now, one of the issues that we did not see this year because there's been a working group, legalization of marijuana.
I really do believe that marijuana should be legalized. It should be regulated. Alcohol and tobacco are far more dangerous and far more deadly substances, but they have a lot of corporate money behind them, and they have really good lobbyists, and that's why they're legal and everywhere. Not to say that there aren't risks with marijuana, but it should be legal, it should be regulated, and we can learn the lessons of places like Colorado and how you roll it out, but there's no reason for it to be illegal. It puts a segment of the population, predominantly the African American population, in prison for things that white people are also doing and not getting arrested for, and it's creating the school to prison pipeline. It's a mess, and it can solve a lot of our problems if we just treat it like any other substance.
Well, we're not going to see any movement on it at the Assembly this year, but potential for the Assembly moving forward as we see what happens in Massachusetts. Right. To see what happens here in Rhode Island. So you've got a crowded primary.
Yes.
You've got an incumbent who's been there for a number of years. also a progressive opponent. Where would you put yourself in the political spectrum?
I don't like labels. I'm mostly focused on getting things done for the people in my district. You know, people like to throw things around and put you in a box, and that's not what we need in our politics. That's why we're where we are, with people running around saying, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and I hate you because you're the other thing. And it's not productive. You know, I believe in very democratic values. I believe in mostly progressive policy positions. But I think we need to be able to talk to one another as Rhode Islanders and as people who are committed to making our state a better place, and leave the labels for the talk shows and fighting on social media and focus on actually getting things done for the people in Rhode Island.
And so let's talk a couple more issues up at the State House right now. The issue of guns.
Yes.
We saw that the House passed red flag legislation, looking to see action on the Senate side. What's your thoughts on the gun debate?
Well, I was really excited a couple of weeks ago to be down in Washington with a bunch of students from Providence who were at the March for Our Lives. And it was amazing to see young people come together to finally put a stop to the scourge of gun violence that's plaguing our country. And it hits every aspect of our society. It's deeply ingrained in our consciousness that there are some places where you just can't go outside, or my kid might not be safe at school. And so we just have to take common sense steps to keep people safe. And it's not about, you know, people like to make this about the government and tyranny and the Second Amendment. This is about keeping kids safe. And that's where it should be.
Do you think that there's a potential for the red flag legislation to move through on the Senate side from what you've been keeping tabs on?
I would hope so. I would really hope so. And I would hope that, you know, my opponent votes for it.
And so what are you continuing to keep an eye on up there as the incumbents up there? You've got a primary, but keeping an eye on what the Assembly achieves this year. What are you looking at?
Well, I'm mostly looking to make sure that we get a good budget that invests in our schools, that invests in economic development, and that invests in healthcare and our social safety net. Those are the most important things. And I'm also looking for the legislature to make progress on things that are going to move our state forward, to continue investing in the kinds of research and development that can create new jobs in our state, and protecting the most vulnerable in our society, and making sure that all of the institutions and programs that lift people up are fully funded. And, you know, I'm really looking for them to keep protecting our democracy. You know, we're at a really tough time in our country right now. And there are things, my opponent, for example, is sponsoring a bill to make our voter ID law even stricter right now. And those are things that are going to continue to erode our democracy and turn people off. And we have to be doing the exact opposite right now.
So what do you think are going to be the deciding factors in Senate District 5?
I think people are looking for a new, fresh voice, and they're looking for someone who has ties to the district that they're running in. I think that that's really important. I mean, I grew up at my grandmother's house in this district. I grew up going to Caserta all the time after soccer practice. Both of my grandfathers owned small businesses in this district. One owned a body shop, one owned a pharmacy. Fun fact, they're both chain dollar stores now. So if that doesn't tell you what's happened to the middle class, I don't know what would. And I was very excited to come back here when I moved home, because it's, you know, Federal Hill, the West End, Mount Pleasant. It's everything that's great about Rhode Island and about America. It's where immigrants have been coming for hundreds of years now to make Rhode Island their home and make this country what it has become.
Well, again, this is the official kickoff, but you've clearly been hard at work at the campaign trail. I'm sure I'll be hearing more from you and position papers and campaigning moving forward. But Nick Audiello, again, anything else you want folks to know while we have you here?
It's a beautiful day. Go get some sun.
Get some sun. It is shining here into the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We appreciate Nick taking the time to come in. Everyone, Paul Dowdy, Jennifer Lawless down at American University. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, 3 o'clock with the Taste and Rick Simone. We'll have more for you in store on GoLocalProv.com. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.